Riverview, Michigan, didn't often make national news. With a population of 8,000, a main street lined with shops built in the 1950s, and a lake that gave the town its name, that was about all there was to see. There was little crime beyond petty shoplifting and domestic disputes, until June 15, 2024. The Riverview Chronicle called it Bloody Saturday. The local St. Michael's Church was decorated with white lilies and gold ribbons for the wedding of Brian Foster and Jessica Hart. Their engagement announcement 6 months earlier had been the talk of the town. No surprise, as the most eligible bachelor and the owner of a popular bookstore were supposed to be the perfect couple. But instead of wedding bells, police sirens rang out that day. I walked into the groom's room to tell him it was time to go, and I saw him just lying there, wedding planner Lauren Page later recounted. At first, I thought he had fainted from nerves, but then I saw the blood. Detective Thomas Shepard arrived at the scene at 10:47 a.m., 9 minutes after the 911 call. 27 years on the force, the last 15 as a chief detective. But even he paled at the sight of the body. The victim was lying on his back, dressed in a wedding suit. The only thing that marred the perfect image of the groom was the knife handle sticking out of his chest and a bloodstain spreading across his snow-white shirt, his report said. The knife had entered precisely between the 4th and 5th ribs, piercing the heart. Death was almost instantaneous. The murder weapon, an ordinary kitchen knife with a wooden handle, could have been found in any home in Riverview. While the forensic team examined the crime scene, Shepard began interviewing witnesses. There were about 20 people in the church, the organizers, early guests, the priest, and the bride and groom's parents. No one saw anything. Brian entered the groom's room at 9:30 to get ready. At 10:35, he was found dead. Jessica Hart, the bride, was hysterical. In the wedding dress she had spent 4 months choosing, she sat on the steps of the church and stared into space. "This can't be," she repeated. "We were going to Italy after the wedding. We had tickets. Who could... Why?" At 11:45 a.m., Riverview Hospital received a report of a homicide. Emily Clark, a nurse in the emergency room, heard other nurses whispering about what had happened. Brian Foster, the bank manager, killed at his wedding? Emily dropped the patient's medical file. Her colleagues noticed how pale she had turned, but didn't think much of it. The news was shocking for everyone. No one remembered at that moment that Emily and Brian had been a couple 3 years earlier. "She took a sudden day off," recalled senior nurse Patricia Gomez. "She said she wasn't feeling well. Nothing unusual considering the circumstances. It's a small town and many people knew Brian." By evening, Detective Shepard had compiled an initial list of suspects. At the top was Martin Lewis, Brian's rival at the bank, who had a clear motive. Brian had recently been promoted, a position Martin had hoped to fill. Second was Jessica's father, Richard Hart, who, according to rumors, disapproved of the marriage and had had a loud argument with his future son-in-law the day before. And third was the victim's ex-girlfriend, Nurse Emily Clark. At 7:20 p.m., Thomas Shepard rang the doorbell of a small house on the outskirts of Riverview. Emily didn't answer right away. Her eyes were red, as if she had been crying. "Miss Clark, I'm Detective Shepard. I need to ask you a few questions about Brian Foster." "I haven't seen him in 3 years," she replied quietly, letting the detective into the house. "Not since he left." The living room was small but cozy. There were bookshelves up to the ceiling, an old sofa covered with a knitted blanket, and several plants on the windowsill. Nothing unusual, except for the photographs on the mantelpiece. In one of them, Emily stood next to Brian Foster. They were smiling, holding hands against the backdrop of Lake Riverview. "Did you know it was his wedding today?" Shepard asked. "The whole town knew." Emily looked away. "It's hard to keep a secret in Riverview." "Where were you between 9 and 11 this morning?" "At work, at the hospital. Then I heard the news and took the rest of the day off. I can give you my colleagues' contact details, they'll confirm." Shepard made a note in his notebook. An alibi was easy to check. "Tell me about your relationship with Brian." Emily took a deep breath. "We dated for 3 years. Everything was perfect. We were planning to get married, and then he just said it was over. No explanation. He packed his things and left. A month later, I found out he was dating Jessica." "And how did you react?" How does any woman who's been dumped react? I cried. I was angry. Then I accepted it. She looked at the photo. That was a long time ago, Detective. I've moved on. But something in her voice made Shepard doubt that. 27 years on the job had taught him to recognize lies. As he left, it started to rain. Shepard's car drove past the house across the street, where a woman's figure flashed in the window. Sarah Mitchell, Emily's teacher and best friend, was watching the house with a worried expression on her face. Meanwhile, at the morgue, pathologist Dr. Raymond Carter had finished the autopsy. Death was instantaneous. The blow was delivered with great force, but at a precise angle. The killer knew where to strike, or he was very lucky. There are no fingerprints on the knife handle, only traces of latex gloves. Meanwhile, in a house on the other side of town, Jessica Hart sat surrounded by flowers and gifts for her wedding. Her hand clenched the phone, which displayed a message she had received that morning. He doesn't deserve happiness. Neither do you. The sender's number was unknown. The second day of the investigation began at 7:30 a.m. Detective Shepard stood in front of a board at the Riverview Police Department, studying photos from the crime scene. Behind him, two assistants, Officers Ramirez and Coleman, were working on witness statements. Emily Clark's alibi isn't completely solid, Ramirez said, handing Shepard a printout. She was at the hospital from 7 o'clock to 10:20, but then she took a break and was gone for about 40 minutes. She returned at 11 o'clock, heard about the murder, and took the rest of the day off. Shepard noted this on the board. It was a 7-minute drive from the hospital to the church. Theoretically, Emily could have driven there, committed the murder, and returned. What about surveillance cameras? We're checking the footage from the hospital parking lot and the streets between the hospital and the church. It will take some time. We don't have many cameras in this city. What about other suspects? Coleman flipped through his notebook. Martin Lewis was at the bank attending a Saturday meeting. 10 witnesses confirmed this. Richard Hart was at the church, but in a different wing of the building, talking to the priest. The priest confirms that they were together from 9:15 until the body was discovered. At 9:45, the detective parked outside the Riverview Elementary School. Sarah Mitchell was sitting at a desk in an empty classroom, laying out teaching materials. When she saw the police badge, she tensed up. "I'd like to talk to you about your friend, Emily Clark," Shepard said. "Emily? What about her? Is she okay?" "As far as I know, yes, unlike her ex-boyfriend, Brian Foster." Sarah's face changed. Anxiety, irritation, wariness. The emotions flashed so quickly that Shepard barely noticed them. "How long have you been friends with Emily?" "Since college, 15 years. We moved to Riverview together, got jobs. She's always been there for me, and I've been there for her." "And when was she dating Brian?" Sarah frowned. "Yes, and when he dumped her without any explanation." "Tell me more about that." "They met at a bank charity event. A week later, Brian asked her out on a date. After a year of dating, they moved in together. 2 years later, they started talking about marriage." "And then what happened?" "In April 2021, Emily came home from the night shift and found a note. 'I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore. It's not you.' That was it. His things were gone. His phone was turned off. He even changed his route to work so he wouldn't run into her." "How did she handle it?" "How do you think?" Sarah turned sharply. "She was devastated. She didn't eat or sleep. She called him hundreds of times. I was afraid she would do something to herself." A month later, we saw him with Jessica at a restaurant. He was laughing, holding her hand, as if Emily had never existed in his life. How did Emily react when Brian and Jessica announced their engagement? She coped. Over time, she started seeing a therapist. She got her life back. She's even been seeing someone for the last 6 months. "Who exactly?" "A doctor from the hospital, Dr. Pierce from cardiology, but it's not serious. Just a few dates." Shepard made a note. "I saw you at Emily's house last night." Sarah froze. "I visit her often. We live across the street." "You looked concerned." "Wouldn't you be concerned? Her ex-boyfriend's been murdered. The police are asking questions." Jessica Hart called the station at 11:23. "Detective Shepard? I found something. In Brian's things." Half an hour later, Shepard was sitting in the living room of the house Jessica had bought with Brian 6 months earlier. I was sorting through his papers for the funeral, Jessica said slowly, as if each word caused her pain. And I found this envelope in his desk. Shepard carefully picked up the envelope with latex gloves. Inside was a stack of printed emails. They were all from Emily Clark, dated over the last 2 years. "He never told me she was still writing to him," Jessica whispered. Shepard glanced through the emails. The first ones were full of pain and confusion. "Why did you leave? What did I do wrong? Please talk to me." Then the tone changed to anger and accusations. And finally, the last letters, dated just 2 months earlier, contained veiled threats. "One day justice will prevail. You won't get away with this. All secrets come out in the end." "He was afraid," Jessica said suddenly. "The last few weeks. He was constantly checking the doors and windows. He said he felt like he was being watched." "Did he go to the police?" "No. He said it was just nerves before the wedding. But one day I heard him talking on the phone. He said, 'You can't keep doing this. We had an agreement. That was 3 years ago.'" "Do you know who he was talking to?" "No. He went out onto the balcony when he saw me, and when I asked him, he said it was work." "Jessica, what do you know about the reasons for Brian and Emily's breakup?" "Only what he told me. That they weren't right for each other. That he realized it too late." "There's something else." Jessica stood up and took a small box out of her desk drawer. "It's a flash drive. I found it among his things with a note saying, 'In case something happens to me.' I couldn't open it. It's password protected." At 3:45 p.m., a police technician cracked the flash drive's security. Inside were photos, dozens of photos of Brian, taken secretly. Brian leaving the bank, Brian getting into his car, Brian and Jessica at a restaurant. All the photos were dated within the last 6 months. "Classic stalking," said Officer Ramirez. "Look, they're taken from different angles, but always from a distance, as if the photographer didn't want to be seen." The flash drive also contained a text document titled, "The Truth About Brian Foster." "Brian Foster is not who he claims to be," read Shepard aloud. "Behind his charismatic smile and impeccable suit lies a manipulator and a liar. I am gathering evidence of his true nature, and when the time comes, everyone will know the truth." At 5:20 p.m., Shepard returned to Riverview Hospital. Dr. Alex Pierce, a cardiologist, agreed to talk to him between patients. "Emily?" he asked. "Yes, we've seen each other a few times. Nothing serious. She's nice, but reserved. It's hard to know what she's thinking." "Did she talk about her ex? Brian Foster?" "Not really. She just mentioned that she was in a serious relationship that ended badly." "Have you noticed anything unusual about her behavior in the last few weeks?" "Well, she canceled our last date. She said she was busy with an important project, and a week before that I saw her in the park. She was sitting on a bench across from the bank. She said she was waiting for a friend, but she looked tense." Shepard thanked the doctor and headed to the emergency room. Patricia Gomez, the head nurse, agreed to show him Emily's work schedule for the past few months. "She's been working a lot of extra shifts," Patricia noted, "especially evenings and weekends. She said she needed the money for home repairs, but I never saw her doing any repairs." "How did she react to the news of Brian Foster's engagement?" "She didn't react at all, which is the thing. Whenever anyone mentioned it, she just changed the subject. Too calm for someone who had been dumped like that." As he left the hospital, Shepard met an elderly woman who introduced herself as Martha Jenkins, Emily's neighbor. "I heard you were asking about her," Martha said. "She was a lovely girl, always said hello, helped with the shopping. But something had been going on with her the last few months." "What exactly?" "Strange things. She started going out at night, getting in her car and driving away. She'd come back in the early hours of the morning, and once I saw her burning some papers in her backyard. And then there were the phone calls." "What kind of calls?" "She was screaming. I didn't want to eavesdrop, but the windows were open. She was saying things like, 'You can't do this to me again, and I won't let you ruin this.'" At 7:30 p.m., Shepard was studying the case file. Financial records showed that Emily had withdrawn nearly $10,000 in cash from her account over the past 6 months, an unusual amount for a nurse with her salary. A phone call interrupted his thoughts. Detective Shepard? This is Sarah Mitchell. I need to tell you something about Emily and Brian. I'm listening. Not over the phone. It's complicated. It could be dangerous. Meet me at the lake at the old pier in an hour? Shepard agreed, but something about the conversation made him wary. He checked his gun and called Officer Ramirez to be nearby, just in case. Lake Riverview was dark and quiet when Shepard parked at the old pier. Sarah was already waiting for him, pacing nervously on the wooden deck. "Thank you for coming," she said, looking around. "I should have told you this earlier, but I was afraid for Emily." "What exactly did you want to tell me?" "Brian didn't just dump Emily. He did something much worse." At that moment, Shepard's phone vibrated. A message from Ramirez. "We checked the cameras. Emily Clark didn't leave the hospital on the day of the murder, but another nurse in the same medical uniform and mask left the hospital, the height and build match." Shepard didn't have time to finish reading. He heard footsteps behind him and spun around, instinctively reaching for his gun. But it was Emily. "I'm glad you're both here," she said with unusual firmness in her voice. "It's time to tell the truth. The whole truth about Brian Foster." The silence on the pier at Lake Riverview was broken only by the gentle lapping of water. Detective Shepard stood between two women, Sarah Mitchell, who looked increasingly frightened, and Emily Clark, whose eyes betrayed a strange determination. "Emily, what are you doing?" Sarah whispered. "What I should have done a long time ago," Emily replied, keeping her eyes fixed on the detective. "Brian didn't deserve what happened to him, but he also didn't deserve happiness with Jessica. Not after what he did." Shepard slowly lowered his hand, which had instinctively gone to his holster. "I'm listening, Miss Clark. You think you know what happened, don't you? The obsessed ex-girlfriend couldn't let go and decided to get revenge, but that's just the surface. Then tell me the rest." Emily looked out at the lake. "Brian and I met at a bank event. He was charming, smart, ambitious. Within months, I was completely in love. We made plans, a house, a family, a future, and I didn't see the signs." "What signs?" "The way he controlled me. Brian always knew where I was, who I was talking to, what I was doing. He explained it away as caring. 'I'm just worried about you, honey.' He convinced me to quit my job at the city hospital and take a local one so you wouldn't get tired from the commute. He suggested we open a joint bank account to make it easier to plan our future. He even turned me against some of my friends who, he said, were a bad influence on me." Sarah sniffed quietly. "I tried to warn her, but she wouldn't listen. In the last year before we broke up, I started noticing other things," Emily continued. "Money missing from our account. Strange phone calls he took behind closed doors. Once I found a ticket to an exhibition he hadn't told me about, and it was for two people." "Did you think he was cheating on you?" Shepard asked. "That would have been easier. I started following him, checking his phone when he was asleep, and I found something else." Emily took a folded piece of paper out of her pocket and handed it to the detective. It was a bank statement in Brian Foster's name, but not from their joint account, from another one Emily didn't know about. "He was systematically withdrawing money," she said. "Not just my savings, but other people's money too. Look at the payees, shell companies, offshore accounts. Brian borrowed money from people who trusted him as a bank manager and invested it in risky schemes. Some worked out, and he paid back the debts with interest, strengthening his reputation. But many failed. He started taking out new loans to cover the old ones, a classic pyramid scheme." Shepard studied the document. The figures looked impressive. The transfers amounted to hundreds of thousands of dollars. "And when I found out, he realized he'd been exposed. The next day, he disappeared with a note." "But that was 3 years ago. Why didn't you go to the police then?" Emily smiled bitterly. "I had no proof. He destroyed all the papers I found. He took my laptop where I had saved screenshots. It was his word against mine, a respectable bank manager against a nurse with emotional problems. Besides, he threatened me." "How exactly?" "He said that if I went to the police, he would destroy my career. He had connections in the medical community, hospital sponsors, and I believed him." Sarah moved closer. "Brian was a master manipulator. He made Emily believe that she was to blame, that she was too suspicious, that she was paranoid. Classic gaslighting." Shepard shifted his gaze from one woman to the other. But why now? Why did you decide to come forward now, after he's been killed? Because 3 months ago, I started getting calls, Emily replied. Anonymous ones. At first I thought it was a prank, but then the caller started mentioning details that only Brian and I knew. And he told me that Brian was doing the same thing to Jessica, manipulating her, controlling her finances, possibly stealing money from her store. Did you try to warn Jessica? No. I didn't want to deal with Brian again. But I started gathering evidence. I tracked his financial transactions through friends in the banking industry. I took photos of his meetings with people who could be his investors. The photos we found on the flash drive? Yes, I wanted to gather enough evidence so that this time I couldn't be discredited. And when I found out about the wedding, I knew I had to act fast. I was planning to hand over all the evidence to the financial police next week. But someone beat you to it, Shepard concluded. Yes, Emily lowered her head. And I'm afraid I know who it was. She turned to Sarah, who took a step back. The teacher's face was contorted with fear. Sarah has been by my side all these years, Emily continued. She saw how I suffered after Brian left, how I tried to gather evidence of his schemes. She helped me watch him, take pictures, but I never asked her. Emily, stop! Sarah cried out. You don't understand. Detective. Emily looked straight into Shepard's eyes. On the day of the murder, I was indeed at the hospital, as the cameras show. But Sarah often borrowed my uniform. She's about my size. She could have put on a medical gown and mask and left the hospital through the service entrance, which isn't visible to the cameras. Shut up! Sarah suddenly pulled a small gun from her pocket. Just shut up! Shepard instinctively stepped between the women. Miss Mitchell, put the gun down! You don't understand! Sarah's voice trembled. She was obsessed with him. All these years, letters, stalking, talking only about him. She couldn't let go. I tried to help her forget, move on, but she wouldn't listen. And then he announced his wedding, and she broke down. Sarah, what are you talking about? Emily looked genuinely surprised. I sent the letters to make him think I was still obsessed with him, to lull him into a false sense of security while I gathered evidence of his crimes. Lies! Sarah shouted. You called him every day from different numbers. You followed his every move. You even broke into his house and left your photo in his nightstand. I took it before Jessica found it. Shepard slowly raised his hand. Miss Mitchell, I want you to put the gun down right now and we'll discuss this calmly. She's obsessed, Detective. Sarah kept her eyes on Emily. And she's dangerous. I thought I could control the situation, protect her from herself. But after what she did at the wedding... Sarah. Emily's voice was unexpectedly calm. I wasn't at the wedding. I was in the hospital, you know that. Who said the murder happened at the wedding? Sarah smiled a strange, twisted smile. The ceremony hadn't even started yet. It was in the groom's room. No one saw you come in through the back door. No one saw you stab him in the heart. Only I knew you were going to do it. Shepard tensed. Miss Mitchell, how do you know these details? We haven't released them to the public. Sarah looked at the detective and something changed in her eyes. Because I was there, Detective. I was watching her. I always watched her, to protect her, to stop her if I had to. But you didn't stop her? I didn't make it in time. I saw her go into the church, but I lost sight of her. When I found the groom's room, Brian was already lying on the floor and Emily was gone. Emily turned pale. Sarah, I didn't kill him. I was in the hospital. There are witnesses, cameras. You've always been smart, Emily, Sarah said with a kind of terrifying tenderness. Always planning ahead. Alibis, cameras, witnesses. But you forgot one thing. I know you better than anyone. Shepard suddenly realized that the situation was becoming critical. Miss Mitchell, this is the last time I'm asking you to put down the gun. But Sarah didn't seem to hear him. I've been there for you for 15 years, Emily. I've loved you for 15 years, and all you ever saw was him. Even when he left you, it was still only him. Emily took a step forward. Sarah, please give the gun to the detective. I didn't kill Brian, and if you saw who did it... I saw you! Sarah screamed. I always see only you! At that moment, Officer Ramirez appeared from behind the trees with her weapon at the ready. Police, drop your weapons! It all happened in a split second. Sarah spun around at the sound of the voice. Shepard rushed toward her, trying to knock the gun out of her hand, and a shot rang out. Emily screamed and grabbed her shoulder. The bullet had grazed her. Sarah stared at the blood seeping between Emily's fingers, her face contorted with horror. No, no, I didn't mean to. She lowered the gun and collapsed to her knees, sobbing. 2 hours later, at the Riverview police station, Sarah Mitchell was giving her official statement. Her eyes were empty, her voice monotone, as if she were talking about someone else. I always loved her, Sarah said, since my freshman year of college, but she never saw me as anything more than a friend. And then he came along, Brian Foster, with his perfect smile and expensive suits, and she fell in love. I endured. I was there for her. I supported her when he controlled her every move. I comforted her when she cried because of his coldness. I urged her to leave when I noticed he was stealing her money, but she wouldn't listen. And then he left her. And I thought, finally, now she'll see that I was always there for her, but no. She became even more obsessed with him. Every day, all she talked about was Brian. Plans to prove he was guilty. Plans to get revenge. She sent him letters, followed him. It was unhealthy. I tried to distract her. I introduced her to Dr. Pierce. I tried to convince her to move to another city. Nothing worked. And then he announced his engagement to Jessica. And Emily changed. She became calm, too calm. I'd seen that look before. When she was working on a difficult problem, she was planning something. I started watching her even more closely. One night I followed her to Brian and Jessica's house. She just sat in her car, watching the windows. Another time, she walked around the church where the wedding was supposed to take place. She studied the doors, the windows, the layout of the rooms. On the day of the wedding, I knew something was going to happen. I drove to the church early in the morning and saw Emily entering through a side door. I followed her but lost sight of her in the hallways. When I found the groom's room, Brian was already lying there. A knife was sticking out of his chest. Emily was nowhere to be seen. I panicked and ran away. But that surveillance camera footage, Shepard began. Sarah smiled weakly. Yes, Emily was at the hospital. I took care of that. I took her uniform, put on a mask and a wig. I left so that the cameras would record me leaving. Someone who looked like Emily leaving the hospital. Then I came back through the service entrance, changed my clothes, and left looking like myself. The perfect alibi for Emily, to protect her. I've always protected her. But if Emily was in the hospital, then who killed Brian Foster? Sarah looked up at the detective with empty eyes. I killed him, detective. I protected Emily from herself. She planned it, talked about it all night long. How she would stop the wedding, how he would pay for everything. I knew that if she did it, her life would be ruined forever. So I did it for her. You understand that you are confessing to murder? Shepard clarified. Yes, Sarah nodded. I found him alone in the groom's room. I said I was there from Emily, that I had proof of his financial fraud. He laughed in my face. He said no one would believe me. Not me, not that psychopath Emily. And even if there was proof, he had enough money and connections to avoid punishment. And then he said, I've been controlling her like a puppet for 3 years. I could have kept going, but she got boring. At least Jessica brings in useful connections and money from the store. I couldn't take it anymore. I took the knife I had brought with me and... Sarah fell silent, staring at her hands. I never wanted to hurt Emily. Everything I did for her. At Riverview Hospital, Emily Clark sat on the edge of her bed while a nurse changed the bandage on her shoulder. The wound was superficial. The bullet had only grazed her skin. You need to rest, the nurse said. The doctor said you're in shock. But Emily wasn't listening. She was watching Detective Shepard, who was waiting by the door. Did she confess? Emily asked when the nurse left. Shepard nodded. Yes. She told us everything in detail. From what we can gather, she did indeed kill Brian Foster to protect you from yourself. I don't believe it. Emily shook her head. Sarah couldn't have. She was always so quiet, so kind. Sometimes the quietest people hide the strongest feelings, the detective remarked. She loved you, Miss Clark, an unhealthy, obsessive love, and when she thought you might do something irreparable, she decided to act. But I didn't plan to kill him, Emily exclaimed. I was gathering evidence of his schemes to turn it over to the authorities, not to... I could never have done that. Sarah Mitchell believed you would. She saw what she wanted to see. Your letters to Brian, Your photos, your late-night trips to his house. To her, it looked like a plan for revenge. Emily covered her face with her hands. 15 years. I didn't notice anything. I thought she was just my best friend. If I had known... She sent that message to Jessica on the morning of the wedding? He doesn't deserve happiness, and neither do you. Apparently so, Emily sighed. She wanted the suspicion to fall on me if anything went wrong. The perfect scapegoat, a jilted woman seeking revenge. Shepard paused, as if deciding whether to ask the next question. What about Brian's accusations? Financial fraud, stealing your money, is that true? Yes, Emily replied firmly. I told the truth. He built a pyramid scheme using his position at the bank. Many people in Riverview trusted him with their savings, unaware of where their money was really going. Do you have any proof? Emily nodded. In my house, under the floorboards in my bedroom. Copies of statements I managed to make before he left. Names of investors I tracked down over the years. Records of his phone calls. That should be enough to start an investigation. Shepard stood up. I'll look into this. If you're telling the truth, it might soften Sarah's sentence. If not legally, then at least in the eyes of the public. As the detective headed for the door, Emily called after him. Detective, you asked what I was doing on my nighttime outings. I was meeting with people who had also been hurt by Brian's schemes. Some were afraid to speak openly. He threatened them just like he threatened me. The $10,000 I withdrew from my account was money I borrowed from old Mr. Johnson so he wouldn't lose his house. Brian convinced him to invest all his savings in a non-existent project. And the documents you burned? Drafts of letters to Brian. I wanted him to think I was still obsessed with him so he wouldn't suspect I was investigating his activities. Emily looked out the window at St. Michael's Church. You know what's ironic, Detective? I did go to church before the wedding, but not to plan a murder. I wanted to talk to Jessica, to warn her, to show her the evidence, to save her from the fate that befell me. But every time I couldn't bring myself to do it. I was afraid she wouldn't believe me, that Brian would convince her I was obsessed. You can still tell her the truth, Shepard said, when this is all over. If she wants to listen, Emily replied quietly. If anyone wants to listen. Rain drummed on the roof of the police station as Detective Shepard laid out the documents he had found under the floorboards in Emily Clark's house on the table. 3 folders neatly labeled Financial Transactions, Victims, Personal Notes. This is impressive, Officer Ramirez said, looking through the contents of the first folder. She gathered more evidence than some of our financial investigations. Shepard nodded. Bank statements, copies of checks, transfer schemes between accounts. Everything pointed to systematic fraud by Brian Foster. Check all the names in the victims folder. We need statements. By evening, the picture was clear. 12 Riverview residents confirmed that they had entrusted Brian with their savings for special investments with guaranteed returns. Some had actually received the promised interest payments. The first victims of a pyramid scheme always get paid. Others had been waiting for months, receiving excuses from Brian about temporary delays. Martha Johnson, a 72-year-old widow, tearfully recounted how she nearly lost her home after investing her retirement savings. Sweet Emily helped me with the money. She said it was a loan, but I know she would never ask for it back. At 7:40 p.m., Jessica Hart was brought to the station for further questioning. The grief-stricken woman looked even more distraught after learning the truth about her fiancé. I didn't know anything, she repeated. He said the money was coming from his investments, from bonuses at the bank. I believed him. I always believed him. What about your bookstore? Shepard asked. Did he have access to the business finances? Jessica nodded. For the last 3 months, he insisted on joint management. He said that with his financial experience, we would increase profits. I agreed. I even transferred part of the store to him before the wedding. Suddenly, she froze. Wait, 2 weeks ago he mentioned a life insurance policy. He insisted we take out a policy on each other. Brian's insurance is for $1 million, with me as the beneficiary. Shepard exchanged glances with Ramirez. A new motive? In her prison cell, Sarah Mitchell sat motionless, staring at the wall. When Shepard entered, she didn't even turn her head. I have a few more questions, Miss Mitchell. I've already told you everything. Not everything, Did you know about Brian's insurance? That Jessica would get $1 million after his death? Sarah slowly turned around. No. What does that matter? It's a curious coincidence that your friend was gathering evidence of his crimes. He took out insurance, and 2 weeks later he's dead. I killed him, not Emily. Are you sure you were only protecting Emily? Maybe you were hired? $1 million is a good motive. Sarah's eyes flashed with anger. You don't understand. I loved Emily for 15 years. I saw how Brian destroyed her, how she was obsessed with proving his guilt, how she spent her nights studying financial documents instead of living her life. He took 15 years of happiness away from me, and that's why you decided to kill him on his wedding day. Yes, I chose that day specifically so that everyone would think of Emily. It's the perfect motive. A woman scorned takes revenge on the day her ex marries someone else. And the note on Jessica's phone? That was me too. I wanted to reinforce the revenge story. Interesting. Shepard tapped his pen thoughtfully on his notepad. You know what's strange, Miss Mitchell? Experts say the murder was professional. One blow, right to the heart, not the impulsive crime of an elementary school teacher. Sarah turned away. I had a brother. He was in the military. He taught me a few things. A brother? There's no mention of a brother in your file. Stepbrother. We didn't advertise our relationship. Shepard nodded, making a note. One last question. Why did you try to shoot Emily at the lake? If you loved her so much. Sarah clenched her fists. I didn't want to kill her. I was just scared that she would reveal the truth, that she would hate me. I thought it would be better to die together than to lose her forever. In the hospital room, Emily watched the sunset through the window. Shepard sat down next to the bed. $1 million life insurance policy, he said without preamble. Did you know? Emily shook her head. No, but I'm not surprised. Classic scheme. Marry a wealthy woman, take out a life insurance policy, accidentally die. Jessica said he insisted on joint management of her store. Yes, and she transferred part of the business to him. The beginning of the same story as mine, Emily smiled bitterly. First joint accounts, then control of finances, then the money disappears. You really didn't plan to kill him? Emily looked the detective in the eye. No. I wanted justice through the law. I gathered evidence and planned to hand it over to the financial police after the wedding. Why after? I knew his arrest would be a public humiliation. I wanted him to experience what I did, a happy day ruined in an instant. Revenge. Legal justice, Emily corrected. But Sarah, I never thought she was capable of murder. Shepard paused. Miss Clark, there's an interesting entry in the Riverview prison visitor log. A month ago, you visited James Mitchell, who is serving time for armed robbery. Sarah's stepbrother. Emily paled. What was discussed at that meeting? I just wanted to know more about the financial schemes. James worked with Brian before he was arrested. He was one of his investors. And he told you how to stab someone in the heart? No, I never... Shepard's phone rang. A message from the crime scene. Fingerprints on the knife handle under a layer of latex. Partial match with Emily Clark's samples taken from her home. Detective, Emily's voice trembled. Whatever the evidence shows, I didn't kill Brian. Maybe Sarah used a knife from my kitchen, maybe... Or maybe you both planned the murder. Shepard interrupted. Sarah is in love, willing to do anything for you. You crave revenge. It's the perfect plan. She commits the murder, takes the blame, and you walk free. That's absurd. Is that so? Shepard stood up. Emily Clark, you're under arrest on suspicion of complicity in the murder of Brian Foster. It hadn't stopped raining for 3 days. Riverview seemed to be mourning its revealed secrets. At the police station, Detective Shepard watched the prison surveillance footage over and over again. On the screen, Emily Clark sat across from James Mitchell, a man with a hard stare and tattoos on his arms. Without sound, it was impossible to understand what they were saying, but their body language spoke of tension. Emily wrote something in her notebook, then showed it to James. He shook his head, then took the pen and drew something himself. Sarah's stepbrother denies discussing murder with Emily, Ramirez said as she entered the office. He claims the conversation was only about Brian's financial schemes. And the notebook? It was confiscated when he left prison, as required. but the contents are strange. Money transfer schemes, names, dates. And in the corner of one page, there's a small drawing of a human figure with a mark on the chest. Shepard rubbed his nose. Emily doesn't admit to being involved in the murder. She categorically denies it. She says the knife could have been from her kitchen, but she didn't touch it. At that moment, the forensic expert called. Shepard put him on speakerphone. "Detective, we finished analyzing the fingerprints on the knife. There are partial prints under the layer of latex that match Emily Clark's samples. But there's a problem. They're not complete, just fragments. And they're strangely positioned, as if the knife was just lying in her hand, not used to strike." "Could they have been planted?" Shepard asked. "Theoretically, yes. If someone took the knife from her kitchen, where the prints were preserved, or if someone pressed her hand against the knife while she was unconscious or not resisting." Shepard thought about it. The case was getting more complicated by the hour. In the holding cell, Emily sat on a narrow cot, her arms wrapped around her knees. "I didn't participate in the murder," she said when Shepard entered. "Yes, I wanted Brian to pay for his crimes, but through legal means." "And the visit to James Mitchell?" "He was one of Brian's first investors, lost all his money, and out of desperation resorted to robbery. I wanted to get his testimony for a financial investigation." "And the drawing of a human figure with a mark on the chest." Emily sighed. "James told me how Brian once threatened him. He said, 'If you go to the police, you'll get a punch here,' and poked him in the chest with his finger. I sketched it as evidence of the threats." Shepard studied her face. "Why did Sarah take the blame, if you didn't plan the murder together?" "Because she loves me. It's twisted, obsessive, but she loves me. Maybe she really thought she was protecting me from myself." Emily looked up. "Or she's protecting someone else." "Who?" "I've been thinking about it all night. Sarah works at the school. Over the last month, she's mentioned problems with Jessica Hart a lot." "Jessica, Brian's fiancée?" "Yes. Jessica's bookstore regularly holds children's readings. Sarah took her students there. They became close. Sarah said Jessica often cried and seemed frightened. Once she noticed a bruise on her wrist." Shepard tensed. "Are you implying that Brian was abusive?" "I don't know. With me, he was more manipulative than aggressive. But who knows how he behaved with Jessica?" Emily leaned forward. "Check her alibi for the time of the murder, and talk to Sarah again, not as a suspect, but as a friend." Jessica Hart nervously tugged at her sweater sleeve. In the light of the desk lamp, her face looked haggard. "I already gave my statement, Detective. I was with the bridesmaids, getting ready for the ceremony." "The whole time? Without a break?" Shepard clarified. Jessica looked away. "I went to the bathroom for about 10 minutes. "What time was that?" "Around 10:15. She swallowed. "You don't think I—" "Where did you meet Sarah Mitchell?" Jessica flinched. "I didn't— How did you—" "Miss Hart, we have surveillance cameras at the church. Outside, at the entrance. The footage shows you leaving through the side door at 10:13 and meeting a woman who looks like Sarah." Jessica lowered her head. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. "He wasn't who he said he was," she whispered. "At first, everything was wonderful. He was caring and attentive. Then he started controlling me, my spending, my time, my friends, and in the last 2 months, he became violent." "Did he hit you?" "Not often. Only when I provoked him. That's what he said. If dinner was cold, if I was late from the store, if I talked to other men." Jessica rolled up her sweater sleeve, revealing a bruise. "This is from 2 days ago. I told him I wanted to postpone the wedding. He grabbed my arm and said that if I disgraced him, I'd be sorry." "Why didn't you leave?" "He threatened to ruin my business. He had connections in town, influence. I believed him." "And you told Sarah about this?" Jessica nodded. "She used to come into the store sometimes. We got talking. She was kind, understanding. She said she knew something about Brian that could help me get rid of him. We agreed to meet on the morning of the wedding." "What did you talk about at that meeting?" "Sarah said she had evidence of his financial crimes, that if I filed a report right after the ceremony, I could save part of the store and my reputation. I went back to my bridesmaids, and Sarah went to talk to Brian to show him the documents." Jessica fell silent. realizing, oh my God, she went to him with a knife, didn't she? Probably, Shepard nodded. But I'm not sure she acted alone. The rain had stopped by evening when Shepard returned to the prison. This time he came to Sarah with a new version of events. Jessica told the truth, he said without preamble. About your meetings, the bruises, Brian's threats. Sarah sat motionless, staring into space. You were trying to protect not only Emily, but Jessica too, weren't you? You saw how Brian destroyed one life and you didn't want it to happen again. Sarah remained silent. You didn't act alone, Miss Mitchell. I'm sure of that. The only question is, who were you working with? Emily with Jessica, or with both of them? Sarah slowly raised her eyes. No one. I acted alone. I've always been alone. She smiled bitterly. Funny, isn't it? 15 years of loving a man who only sees you as a friend. 5 months of trying to save a woman who is too afraid to save herself. What happened in the groom's room? Sarah sighed. I showed him the documents, copies of the ones Emily had collected. I told him that if he didn't call off the engagement and leave town, it would all go to the police. He laughed. He said Jessica would never have the courage to leave him, that he had a plan for her and the store. And then he said about Emily. What exactly? Your nurse friend is still writing me love letters. She's a pathetic psychopath. Maybe after the honeymoon I'll go back to her, play around a little more. I couldn't take it anymore. I had the knife with me, for protection, in case he got aggressive. I didn't plan to kill him, but at that moment, I saw him continuing to destroy lives, and something just snapped. What about Emily's fingerprints on the knife? It was her knife, from a kitchen set she gave me as a housewarming gift 3 years ago. I took it when I went to see her the day before. I knew that if something went wrong, suspicion would fall on her, not a quiet elementary school teacher. Did you deliberately frame Emily? I don't know. Maybe part of me wanted to punish her for never noticing my feelings. Maybe I wanted her to finally see me, even if it was as a traitor. Emily Clark was released the next day. No evidence of her involvement in the murder was found. Jessica Hart confirmed that she had never met Emily before or during the investigation. Brian Foster's financial fraud became the subject of a separate investigation. Many Riverview residents got at least some of their money back. Sarah Mitchell pleaded guilty in court and was sentenced to 25 years in prison. On the last day of the trial, after the sentence was handed down, Emily approached Sarah. Why? She asked quietly. Why did you never tell me how you felt? What difference would it have made? Sarah replied bitterly. You would have loved him anyway. You don't know that for sure. Emily paused. I'll visit you, if you'll let me. Why? Out of pity? No, because 15 years of friendship means something, even if it ended up like this. Sarah watched Emily walk away, while Detective Shepard watched both women. He knew that there were no real winners in this story, only victims of circumstances, mistakes, and their own weaknesses. A year after the events, Emily Clark moved away from Riverview. Jessica Hart sold the bookstore and also left town. They say she gave some of the insurance money to the victims of Brian's financial fraud. Thomas Shepard sometimes looked through the Foster case files on long evenings. The perfect town, the perfect couple, the perfect wedding day, all destroyed in an instant. He thought about the fine line between love and obsession, between justice and revenge, and about how the most terrible secrets are often hidden in the most ordinary people.